Basically, there are 5 principles that govern a good fly cast. Casting instructors and fly fishers across the world owe a debt of gratitude to a man named Bill Gammel and his father Jay. They both come from Texas in the United States. They formulated what is widely known as Bill Gammel's 5 essentials of fly casting. The first of the 5 essentials that Bill and Jay Gammel formulated are that the rod tip must travel in a straight line between the forward and the back cast. The second is that you must use a proper acceleration of the rod. The third is the elimination of slackline. The fourth is a pause corresponding to the length of line that you have in the air. And finally, the fifth is you must match your casting stroke to the amount of bend that you have in your rod when you're casting. Let's have a more detailed look at each of these 5 essentials. The first one, the fact that the rod tip must travel in a straight line between the back cast and the forward cast. If the rod tip does not travel in a straight line, you will either get a big wide loop or you will get what is called a tailing loop. Now the straight line path of the rod tip between the back cast and the forward cast of the stop is tied in with the second of Bill Gammel's essentials, that is the proper acceleration of the fly rod. It is in fact the acceleration of the fly rod that allows it to bend so that it can describe the straight line between the forward and the back cast. If the fly rod didn't bend between the forward and the back cast, we would never be able to describe a straight line, as you can see with this stiff butt section of the fly rod. The tip describes a big dome shape. The third essential, the elimination of slackline. Now, in order to understand this, there is a general rule that doesn't always apply, but applies to almost all fly casting. That you can remember it by saying that nothing good really begins to happen until you're moving the tip of the fly line. So let's say that I am to pick this line off for a normal overhead cast, and I have a lot of slack line on the water in front of me like this. I will end up using most of my casting stroke before I begin moving the tip of the fly line. So by avoiding slack line in the system, I'm not wasting any part of my casting stroke removing that slack line before I begin moving the tip of the fly line. Slack line is a problem wherever it occurs, whether it's on the water as just before, or whether it's maybe in the form of a big loop hanging right here from the reel. Again, if I don't have my slack line eliminated before I cast, as you can see, I'll end up using the first part of my casting stroke to straighten out or eliminate this slack line. So in this case, for instance, eliminating this slack line would simply be picking up the line and locking it under your finger. Slack line is eliminated. The fourth essential, that you must make a pause corresponding to the length of line that you have in the air, is in fact also tied in with essential number 3, the elimination of slack line. If I don't pause enough in my forward cast to let the line extend completely before making the back cast, I will simply end up using the first part of my back cast to straighten the line before I can begin moving the tip of the line again. So here's the correct pause, which allows the line to unroll fully before I begin my back cast. And if I make too short a pause, I simply end up using the first part of the back cast straighten out the line and creating a lot of problems for myself. Finally, the fifth essential, matching the size of your casting stroke to the amount of line that you have in the air. To cast this short line, as you can see, I can get away with using a very short stroke, very little hand and arm motion. But if I begin to lengthen the line, still using that same short stroke, you will see that the cast simply falls apart. And it does so because I'm not matching the size of my casting stroke to the amount of line in the air and the amount of bend in the rod. So as I lengthen the line outside the rod tip gets heavier and it gets longer, and in order to keep that line flying in the air, I need to move my hand a little bit further. Otherwise, the cast will simply collapse.